At 45, I knew the perimeter of my life, including the corners where grief and routine quietly met each day. We were at the resort because my husband said sun fixes marriage like bleach fixes mildew, harsh but effective sometimes. He booked the oceanfront suite, smiled for strangers, and rehearsed tender lines he could not live with afterward at all. On the third morning, I woke to goals, a metallic suitcase zipper, and my name spoken like a verdict whispered. He stood at the door with my sandals in his fist and said, "I'm done pretending," and opened it wide. The hallway smelled like oranges and chlorine. The floor surprised my feet with its chill, every tile a reprimand today. Guests glanced up from their phones and the ocean kept roaring shameless, as if nobody's life were splitting open nearby. I said his name softly, the way you call a skittish dog, and he refused to turn, already calculating sympathy. Our door shut with that hotel click of finality, then opened again because he tossed my phone into my hands. "No charger," he added, and the cruelty shone like sun on broken glass, bright, everywhere, impossible to ignore even then. I walked barefoot past the ice machine and the humming maid cart, through air-conditioned mercy that wouldn't stay long. In the lobby, orchids preened over glass tables and a woman in linen watched me like a storm approaching slowly. She was at the reception desk, brown eyes steady, a silver necklace catching light and a small scar shimmering there. "Hello," she said, not sweetly, not coldly, the way nurses speak at 3 a.m., when pain and paperwork blurred together. "My name is Alma, and you're going to sit down, drink water, and keep every ounce of your dignity intact." Humiliation tightened my throat, but obedience loosened it. I sat, and the cold leather chair steadied my shaking right then. Alma snapped her fingers at a bellman with grace I envied, and a bottle materialized, sweating like contrition and heat. She asked my room number, my last name, and whether I wanted security. I said no, instantly, absurdly, reflexively then. "He put me out barefoot," I said, and the words felt like seashells, sharp, pretty, cutting my tongue to ribbons. Alma exhaled as if sparing a match. She nodded once, then lifted the phone and pressed a number labeled manager. Her tone shifted from hospitality to family, and I realized the word carried teeth. Cousin meant loyalty here with consequences. She told him a guest had been endangered, barefooted and discarded, and that our property would not host cruelty today. The bellman brought a blanket like a cape and tucked it under my heels, a coronation conducted in whispers nearby. Alma's cousin arrived quickly, hair damp from the pool, wearing authority like sandals, easy to slip on and off daily. He listened without interrupting, then asked for my consent to involve security. I swallowed the salt that rose right there. "Yes," I said, and Alma's fingers relaxed. The tiniest surrender, like setting wet laundry down after wringing it all out. They dispatched a team to our floor. Alma remained with me, building a privacy perimeter out of presence and patience. People drifted nearer, drawn by scandal the way moths are drawn by porch light, but the staff rerouted curiosity efficiently. A little girl offered me a shell she found, iridescent and chipped, and I thanked her like receiving communion today. My husband descended then, flanked by security, shoes squeaking with indignation he mistook for righteousness, job performing exhausted nobility theatrics. He said I was hysterical, and the word flapped uselessly in the conditioned air, a paper bird refusing flight today. The manager asked him if he had put me out barefoot, and my husband laughed as though applauding himself. He said, "I'm done pretending," and the lobby heard it, every consonant lining up like soldiers facing a shoreline assault. Alma's cousin did not raise his voice. He simply produced a policy printout, clean as a scalpel, and waited patiently. By company rules, endangering a guest incurs removal and fees. Additionally, verbal abuse triggers immediate intervention and documentation for liability. My husband smiled at liability like an old poker friend, but the table had turned and he lacked chips tonight. A whisper began in the lobby, not a jeer, not pity, something stranger, a tide turning without wind or warning. People started handing me things, sandals, water, a cardigan naturally shed as if kindness were a currency spending itself freely.
Security asked whether I wanted to press charges, and I watched my husband's face learn about consequences, almost scholarly today. No, I said, not now. And Alma nodded, understanding triage. Dignity first, justice later, strategy threading my pulse with fire. They escorted him away gently, which infuriated him more than shackles would, because gentleness implied he mattered less to anyone. Alma placed a room key before me, new suite, different floor, and said, "You'll decide what's next after breathing safely." We rode the elevator with tourists who pretended not to stare, their reflections multiplying our story in chrome and glass. In the new suite, Alma checked the windows, the closets, the bathroom, an angel disguised as frontline hospitality for me. She said the manager was her cousin, raised with her in a house where you never left anyone outside crying. Then she closed the door and turned, and the room grew quiet enough for the ocean to write captions nearby. I told her about the pretending, how it began with small favors to his mother, then became the marriage's scaffold. I confessed I'd stopped wanting his apologies because they were IOUs he never paid, little white flags without surrender afterward. Alma listened, the way women keep vigil, ordinary and holy, and finally said, "This is not your shame today anymore." She poured more water, asked whether I could eat, and I realized hunger had returned, wearing its real name, survival. Alma set a tray on the table, mango and toast, and said, "Eat enough to think, then we'll make choices." Thinking arrived like a tide change, quiet at first, then sweeping debris from my brain's shoreline, including excuses masquerading wisdom. She gathered my details gently, not gossiping, constructing a narrative scaffold we could climb without slipping into rage or panic. Her cousin returned with a folder, incident report forms, a policy brochure, and a small pair of hotel sandals waiting. He asked for a statement in my words. I wrote slowly, precise, as though etching a boundary into metal forever. Security had already collected his key, requesting alternative accommodations. Apparently, compassion could wear boots and enforce safety with measured authority. News travels across resorts the way wind slips through palm fronds. Within hours, strangers approached bearing practical offerings and stories. A man from Omaha adjusted the sandal straps. A swimmer lent aloe. A grandmother offered quiet company and knitting advice. Somebody filmed only my feet, wrapped in the blanket, captioned, "Hospitality means safety," and posted it with no names attached. By lunch, the clip had bloomed digitally. The comments were little lanterns floating upriver, warm, insistent, illuminating patterns of courage. Alma showed me when I was ready, not earlier, because she was protecting my nervous system like fine glassware always. He texted them, "Maybe we should talk," and the words smelled like wet matches, sardine apologies that would never ignite. Alma's cousin advised replying later, in a public space, with witness presence, with strategy as a life jacket for dignity. I agreed, surprising myself. A steadier woman was assembling, piece by piece, from kindness, policy, and my own backbone today. We reserved a table at the open-air restaurant by dusk, where the ocean writes confessions in disappearing handwriting each evening. Alma would sit nearby, cousin too. Security would shadow discreetly. I would speak without whispering or apologizing for oxygen anymore. Afternoon yawned into blue. I bathed, brushed salt from my hair, and dressed in the hotel's borrowed, blameless cotton dress. In the mirror, I looked like a woman meeting consequences rather than collecting them, and my shoulders finally descended gratefully. He tried calling. We declined. Alma texted a time and location. Dinner, 7, oceanfront, with staff liaison present for accountability. At 6:30, the sky began practicing at sunset, and I practiced my lines, short sentences that didn't plead anymore. He arrived first, of course, like punctuality could serve as character witness. His shirt crisp, his smile rehearsed narrow tonight. He reached for my chair, as though chivalry were a leash. I seated myself and watched confusion bloom quietly inside. Almond approached, laid two menus like neutral flags, and introduced her cousin as the manager overseeing guest welfare tonight here. My husband reached for performance, voice honeyed, telling a version where stress and miscommunication wore the blame like raincoats everywhere. I said, "Please do not narrate over me," and the sentence clicked into place like a spare key finally used. I described the hallway, my feet, the blanket. I used clear nouns and verbs because drama dilutes when overseasoned heavily. He tried to apologize into the open air, but the ocean was louder, and his words drifted like unattended balloons. The manager outlined options discreetly: temporary no contact on property, reimbursement of medical costs, and formal documentation forwarded appropriately to authorities. Additionally, they could charge penalties to the card on file for policy violations. His eyebrows attempted independence unsuccessfully under scrutiny. He said the card was corporate. The cousin asked for company details. The word audit hovered like a hawk overhead. Unexpectedly, diners applauded between courses. Not for us exactly, but for boundaries. It sounded like weather changing continents at dinner time. A teenager from the lobby approached, asked permission, and placed a tiny sea glass heart by my plate for courage later. My husband's voice frayed. He asked for privacy. Alma explained privacy exists inside respect, not beneath it, therefore conditional, always. He leaned in, hissed that I was humiliating him, and I realized humiliation was walking me out barefoot, previously unprotected. "Now," I said, "we're just telling the truth with witnesses, and truth often resembles humiliation to people avoiding accountability repeatedly." He demanded my forgiveness immediately. The ocean laughed. The palm leaves signed their names. Alma's cousin remained resolutely administrative nearby. I said I'd meet tomorrow with a mediator, bring a lawyer soon, and suggested separate transportation home following our checkout. He blinked, because logistics are unromantic. They bite where fantasy keeps silk, and I watched his theater curtains drop abruptly. The manager requested a signature acknowledging conduct. He signed reluctantly. Pens turn heavy under ethics, I learned tonight from witnesses. Afterward, Alma led me along the balustrade. The moon rehearsed itself. My breathing synchronized with workable future at last tonight. We stopped beside the tide pool where tiny worlds begin. She asked whether I wanted the resort to file anything. I chose a careful yes. Incident report forwarded, corporate contact notified, copy kept. Paper becomes armor when feelings collapse suddenly. Unexpectedly, my appetite returned with lemon pie. Alma laughed softly. We ate like conspirators planning a gentle revolution through dessert. She told me her cousin once escorted their aunt from grief, feet bare, after a funeral. Hospitality began there forever. When we returned to the suite, the balcony glowed. A cello played somewhere below, low notes combing the night gently. I stepped outside and called my sister, who answered on the second ring and said, "Tell me everything slowly, please." I spoke until the pie cooled. I said the sentence about pretending aloud, and it unlatched a locked decade inside. Before sleeping, I wrote 3 lists: safety tasks, legal appointments, and desires I had not allowed since 38 years ago. The first item surprised me with its simplicity. Tomorrow morning, buy my own sandals, sturdy ones, in a joyful color. The ocean kept writing captions I could finally read, and none of them included pretending, not even as punctuation anymore.
Morning arrived like forgiveness you don't entirely trust yet. The ocean exhaled, the curtains breathed, and the hotel cotton dress waited on a chair like a temporary truce with myself. I slipped it over sun-tired skin, tied my hair back, and took the elevator to the lobby where the orchids were still busy surviving. Alma waved me over before I finished pretending to be fine. She had coffee,
a map of town, and the kind of smile that says, "We strategize now, we cry later." First, sandals. A boutique by the boardwalk opened at 9, its window glittering with shoes like little declarations. The clerk, a woman with slate gray hair and surfer shoulders, recognized me without pretending otherwise. "We saw," she said. "We brought these aside." She set a pair of sturdy cobalt sandals on the counter, the exact shade of sky that tells weather to behave. "Try them. Then walk like you mean the present tense." They fit as though they'd been waiting for me. I paid, tipped too much, and stepped into the street feeling taller. Not by inches, but by meaning. People glanced at my feet the way pilgrims glance at relics, hopeful that something born with pain can become a blessing. A teen approached, respectful, phone down and palms open, and asked whether he could share how the "hospitality means safety" clip had gone viral. "It's your choice," he added, a sentence that felt like clean water. Consent, that golden hinge. I said, "Share it, but keep my name out of it." He nodded, promised, and looked relieved to be part of something useful that wasn't self-serving. Alma texted, "Breakfast on the terrace." I carried my cobalt courage uphill. Alma had arranged the table in shade, her cousin already there with forms and gentle authority. He said, "We've documented everything. There's also a corporate compliance note triggered by the card comment." We asked him for a different payment method. He produced a personal card with reluctance. We noted the discrepancy. He didn't need to explain why that mattered. Corporate money used for cruelty turns into a tripwire. My phone lit with messages from numbers I didn't know. One was the HR director at my husband's company, writing through a personal account, asking for a time to talk. Another came from a woman who signed her name with a nervous flourish and said, "I think I'm the reason he's been rehearsing, and I am not proud." The world was rearranging itself around truth, the furniture scraping across tile so loudly no one could pretend not to hear. "Pick 3 priorities," Alma said, pouring papaya into bowls like sunrise. "Safety, legal, narrative." I said, "Safety. Keep him away from me on property, and afterward travel in daylight, witnesses for every conversation." "Done," the cousin said, sliding printed temporary no-contact order for the resort, plus escort logistics through checkout. I continued, "Legal. Find a mediator for today. I want a witnessed separation plan with immediate terms, separate rooms, separate flights home, a temporary financial agreement, and an inventory of joint accounts to be frozen pending counsel." "Already called," the cousin said. "My friend Soraya is a certified mediator who volunteers with travelers in crisis. She's available at 2. "Narrative," I said. "We keep the online story human, not vengeful. I don't name him. I keep receipts. I refuse rehearsed apologies. I accept documented amends." Alma clinked her glass to mine. "That's a campaign, sweetie." At 10, I spoke with HR, a woman named Lydia, whose voice sounded like a librarian guarding rare books. She said, "We have been notified, through non-official means, that an employee's corporate card was used for personal expenses at your location during an incident involving a spouse's safety. I am so sorry for what you endured. We take misuse seriously. I'm contacting you privately to ask for permission to receive any documentation the resort provides, should you choose." I asked, "What documentation exists?" Careful now that the ground beneath me was becoming leverage instead of quicksand. "Receipts, policy reports, any waiver or acknowledgement your husband signed, and any video the resort wishes to share." Lydia said, "We will not involve you beyond what you volunteer. But I will be frank. This intersects with a pending internal audit." Something inside me steadied. Strategy loves daylight. I said, I'll consider it. I'm meeting a mediator at 2. Lydia said, May I offer a suggestion, purely human to human? Ask for an immediate cooling off period. Written. Ask for access to transport independent of him. Protect your passwords. And record dates and times of everything, not because you want to fight, but because memory is a sieve when hurt is heavy. I said, I appreciate that. I did. This was the reaction social I didn't expect, a network of strangers making a soft barricade around me. By noon, the boardwalk hummed with a subtle current. Women passed and made eye contact the way lighthouse keepers do, one beam to another. Men gave space without sulk, which felt like a quiet miracle. A musician with a cello sat near the balustrade, playing Bach like a secular psalm. The notes stitched my breathing back together. Alma coordinated. Soraya texted the mediation ground rules. No yelling, no hovering, neutral space, both parties may bring a support person, no recording except for signed agreements, and someone from the resort present strictly as a safety witness. My stomach flipped, then settled. Boundaries have that effect when you're not used to owning them. He messaged, Are we seriously doing this? I answered with the time and location and a final line I never thought I'd write. You do not have my permission to touch me or my belongings. We will speak with witnesses only. At 1, a group of guests I had never met asked whether I'd mind joining them at the beach for a solidarity stroll. They were barefoot on purpose, holding sandals like flags, walking from one end of the resort to the other, not as spectacle, but as a procession for every woman who'd been told to harden up. I cried, yes, the good kind, the kind you can breathe through. I walked among them, cobalt sandals in my hand this time, the sand warm enough to remind me the earth remains generous even when men are not. A lifeguard high-fived me like a sister. An elderly couple clapped slowly. A chef stepped out of the kitchen with a tray of watermelon wedges, saying, For the revolutionaries. It was absurd and holy. Humility and humor, holding hands. Soraya met us outside the conference room at 2. She was 30-something, with braids wrapped into a crown and an expression like weathered wood, elegant because it survived storms. She said, We keep it dignified. She opened the door. We keep it boring. Boring is where agreements live. Inside, Alma and her cousin sat at the far side like benevolent statues. He took the chair opposite, jaw set, a stubborn equation trying to solve itself without changing variables. I placed my notebook on the table. Soraya began, voice calm. Names, purpose, ground rules, end time. I said, surprising myself with how strong my voice sounded, First, I want to confirm the resort's no-contact rule for the duration of my stay and through individual checkout. Alma's cousin said, Confirmed, sliding papers forward. I said, Second, I want to outline immediate practicalities. I keep the suite. He relocates off-property or to a separate wing at his own expense. We divide flight reservations. We draft a temporary financial agreement. He opened his mouth to argue, but then he closed it when Soraya lifted a finger. Gentle, firm. We'll hear each point, Mr. Bennett. Then you'll respond. And finally, I said, I want a written apology addressed to me, not a press release, acknowledging the harm and committing to counseling. I'm not promising forgiveness. I'm not promising a return. I am promising to live in rooms where I don't have to beg the floor to love my feet. The room hushed, even the air listening. He shifted, eyes scanning for exits that weren't there. Boring began like a benediction. Point by point, clause by clause, my humiliation converting into letters, dates, signatures, the alchemy of paper. He tried charm first, the counterfeit currency that had circulated too long in our marriage. "We're both tired," he said, palms up, as if exhaustion were an argument that could absolve an action. Soraya's pen didn't pause. "Please respond to the proposals," she said, kindness grouted with grit. He sighed the way actors do when a scene isn't going their way. "Fine," he said. "Separate rooms, whatever. Flights, she can change hers." He gestured at me like a parcels clerk indicating a box. "The person who endangers does the adjusting," Soraya replied. "You'll cover the change fees and relocate tonight." He laughed, quick and sharp, the sound of a jar lid popping. "With what card?" "The resort flagged my corporate." Alma's cousin folded his hands. "We accept cash or a personal card," he said. "And we have a recorded acknowledgement you signed last night regarding policy violations." The door opened, and a woman stepped in hesitantly, cheeks blotched, hair pulled into a surrender of a bun. Not late teens, not naive. Early 30s, competent, wearing the kind of office dress bought with careful paychecks. The woman who'd messaged me. Soraya rose. "This is a closed session," she said. "She asked to come," I said, surprising myself again. "She sent me a message and wanted to give a statement to me, not to interfere." I nodded to the chair by the wall. "You can listen." He shot me a look that had worked for years, a cocktail of contempt and pity. But it barely grazed me now. She sat, hands folded, eyes moist but clear. "I don't know," she whispered. "Not like this." We continued. Soraya ushered us through logistics, the room, the flights, the passwords. He tried bargaining for my silence, his voice dipping into the register that had once seduced me into amnesia. "We can keep this private," he said. "No one needs to know. It's just a fight." "The lobby heard your thesis. We're writing footnotes now." Soraya's face didn't change, but I sensed approval, or at least relief that my metaphors could haul weight. The mediator went point by point, and he signed like each pen stroke shaved a favorite lie. Meanwhile, the woman in the corner reached into her purse and retrieved an envelope fat with receipts. She whispered, "I copied what I could from his card statements at work. I'm sorry. It's not about vengeance. It's about you not being gaslit anymore." He told me he had separated already. He lunged to grab them. Almost cousins stood without hurry, and the room produced a stillness that discouraged rash movements. Soraya accepted the envelope and slid it toward me only after asking my consent. I nodded. Paper doesn't lie as elegantly as people do. The receipts were a breadcrumb trail leading nowhere noble. Boutique jewelry not given to me, hotel charges aligned with business trips I didn't attend, flowers at odd hours, a private airport lounge membership, and my breath hitched. A transfer from our joint savings into a brokerage account I didn't recognize. He watched my face for lightning and mistook the weather. Calm arrived instead, the dangerous kind. "Lydia from HR called," I said, laying the receipts down like tarot. "She requested documentation. I haven't decided yet, but if you contest the separation terms, I'll send the resort report and these." Soraya cleared her throat. "Mrs. Bennett, perhaps phrase that as an option, not a threat." I nodded. "I'm clarifying stakes. We can exit cleanly, quickly, and in writing, or we can litigate this from the tarmac to the internet." The woman in the corner spoke, voice small but steady. He told me you were hysterical. The clip showed feet wrapped in a blanket. She swallowed. Hysteria looks different. He tried anger next, that old hammer. You're humiliating me, he said. Humiliation happened in the hallway, I answered. This is documentation. Soraya wrote, statement accepted. Apology draft due by 6 p.m. today. He stared at the ceiling as if advocating with the deity. The deity declined to intervene. Fine, he said again, the word losing vowels from fatigue. He signed the room agreement, the flight changes, the temporary financial plan that allocated a living stipend to me from our joint account and froze the rest pending counsel. He signed a consent allowing me sole use of our car back home for 60 days. He signed a consent for access to our safe deposit box. He signed and signed, the pen and oar rowing him toward the consequence shore. When we finished, Soraya exhaled as if setting down a crate. Now the apology, she said. He scribbled shallow words. Soraya pushed the paper back. Specifics, not performance. He tried again, this time writing about barefoot tiles, about the sentence, I'm done pretending, spoken like a sword, and about how I did not deserve any of it. He stopped short of love. Good. I didn't need that counterfeit refunded. We took a break. In the hallway, Alma pressed a cool cloth into my palm, the cousin handed me water, and the woman who'd messaged me stood awkwardly by a ficus. I didn't know he'd do that, she said, shame burning her cheeks. I thought I was a beginning. Turns out I was a cover. I won't attack you, but I'm not rescuing you from consequences either. She nodded. I'm making my own list, she whispered. Password changes, medical checkups, a friend to stay with. I respected her right there, not for the affair, but for the pivot. Back inside, Soraya read the apology aloud. It sat correctly in the room, not redeemed by poetry, not excused by stress, just accurate. The resort added their signatures to the incident record, formalizing the no-contact rule through checkout and promising their legal department would share copies at my request. Alma's cousin slid me a small folder. Printouts, timelines, the seed of a paper fortress. At the end, Soraya asked if either party wished to say anything strategic for their own next step. He said nothing, a depletion disguised as restraint. I said, I am not returning to the suite we shared. I am not returning to the marriage we shared. I will return to myself. We stood. He left first, shoulders rounding into the weight of ordinary accountability. The woman lingered. I'm sorry, she said again, not as absolution, but as inventory. Be safer than I was. She walked away braver than she had entered. That night, the resort hosted a small, unadvertised gathering on the terrace. No speeches, no hashtags, just people passing plates and listening to a cello sing the long notes. Alma touched my shoulder and guided me to a chair with a view of the water combing the moonlight clean. Guests who'd walked the solidarity stroll came by quietly, a chorus of gentle check-ins. A father told his teenage daughter, "Watch how community works." She looked at me as if I were weather and said, "You didn't disappear." I smiled. "Neither did you," I said. My sister arrived on a late flight, suitcase like a drum, keeping time. We sat on the balcony, the ocean transcribing the night in cursive we could finally read. I told her the whole thing and didn't exaggerate, didn't collapse, didn't negotiate with ghosts. We laughed in the places that would have broken me yesterday. We planned the boring revolution, locksmith appointments, attorney consult, banking floors swept clean. Before bed, I stood on the cool tile by choice. My cobalt sandals waited by the door, not as armor, but as an invitation. The apology set folded on the desk, signed in ink that would not loosen. The resort's folder waited beside it, a small skyline of consequences. I slept, not perfectly, not without dreams, but when dawn knocked, I didn't flinch. I opened the door to myself and stepped through.
Dawn arrived bright, and consequence sharpened like shells along shore. Alma knocked softly, carrying coffee and a folder labeled Options. Her cousin followed, steady, with updates about last night's signatures. News had started blooming beyond the lobby, reaching regional stations. The clip of blanket feet became evidence illustrating hospitality ethics. Comments multiplied, careful, not naming me, demanding decent corporate accountability. I wore cobalt sandals and chose steadiness like selecting jewelry. My sister answered texts, filtering reporters requesting statements or access. Alma suggested choosing one journalist known for context, not spectacle. She said clarity is armor, noise attracts scavengers and shadows. At noon, Lydia called again, voice prudent, requesting documented cooperation. I consented narrowly, allowing policy reports and signed acknowledgments shared. She exhaled relief, explaining internal auditors were already scheduling interviews. My husband's name appeared in expenses, glowing like hazard lights. Afternoon carried press vans to the boardwalk, careful but hungry. Alma's cousin arranged a brief statement with boundaries and timeline. We chose the terrace, ocean present, cello practicing patience nearby. I read remarks written deliberately, not trembling, naming principles only. Marriage details stayed private. Behavior and safety became public. I thanked staff, witnesses, mediator, and strangers who walked barefoot. Questions erupted. I answered few, repeating boundaries, without apology. A journalist waited, patient, notebook closed, promising context over clicks. Her name was Naya, and her eyes held weather wisdom. She asked permission to follow quietly, documenting repair without voyeurism. I considered, then said yes, contingent on veto at moments. Naya nodded, recorded time, and promised to remain secondary always. Evening turned gold, and reaction became choreography rather than chaos. The resort posted a message about safeguarding vulnerable guests prominently. My sister drafted appointments, attorney, therapist, locksmith, financial advisor Tuesday. We purchased a notebook and numbered pages for evidence tracking. Under moonlight, I recorded everything: dates, times, names, exact phrases. Naya observed quietly, capturing textures, never faces, respectfully trailing consent and care. Messages multiplied, from women recognizing themselves, sending practical scripts everywhere. One wrote, "I left with slippers, thank you for naming." Another said, "Record while calm and breathe before replying, always." A hotel in Spain offered nights if shelter was needed. I felt held by strangers, whose kindness knew logistics well. Morning brought rumors, then emails, then calendar invites marked confidential. Lydia requested a formal interview, with independent counsel present beside. I scheduled Friday, requested accommodations, and forwarded contact for mediator. He texted paragraphs arranged like bouquets, fragrant and suffocating simultaneously. I archived them, a museum of tactics I discarded today. Naya asked whether we could record a statement addressing speculation. I agreed, setting terms: no names, systems, consequences, boundaries, resilience. We filmed near the tide pool, cello rehearsing,
Gulls advising. I said humiliation thrives privately, but accountability prefers sunlight, actually. The clip traveled, not explosive, but steady, like weather systems. Alma watched metrics only to anticipate resources and possible backlash. The resort received threats from trolls. Security adjusted staffing quietly. My sister arranged a safe driver, routes avoiding predictable stops. Naya captured a moment buying sandals, receipts tucked like talismans. She interviewed Alma briefly about policy becoming kindness with teeth. Alma replied, hospitality means refusing cruelty space, offering dignity infrastructure. The phrase dignity infrastructure stuck, and strangers repeated it everywhere. Lydia forwarded confirmation of an audit, beginning Monday, independent team. A podcast requested conversation. We waited until paperwork settled appropriately. He appeared online, complaining about cancel culture, conveniently forgetting context. Comments referenced cobalt sandals and policy, deflecting his narrative attempts. Naya published a first piece, gentle and precise, refusing sensationalism. She described the orchestra of helpers, not just the harm. She quoted Alma saying, community is policy, practiced with patience. The piece traveled further, reaching morning shows and legal blogs. Invitations multiplied, but we triaged, choosing conversations offering context care. Soraya reminded me, fame is adrenaline. Justice is endurance work. I slept with curtains open, letting tide rhythms tutor courage. My sister and I practiced answers, concise, unseduced by tears. We built a phrase book for interviews. Phrases like, I decline. Also, please ask about systems, not gossip regarding individuals. Thanks. HR scheduled my interview in a neutral hotel conference room. Lydia arranged car service and security, an umbrella against weather. She cautioned audits reveal strange floors. To keep balance, breathe. The woman from mediation sent updates, leaving him, choosing counseling. I wished her steadiness, not as absolution, but evolution carefully. My attorney reviewed the agreement, calling it clean and enforceable. He advised documenting contact, in writing, never alone, never impulsive. Alma delivered tea, and a hug disguised as logistics beautiful. She told me survivors deserve ceremony, even if improvised tonight. So we held one, tiny, with cello and candles nearby. We wrote wishes on napkins, folded them like boats together. The tide carried them, then returned fragments spelling stubborn hope. Naya filmed only shadows and water, keeping people respectfully invisible. Her editor approved a feature exploring policy, community, and aftermath. The headline avoided cruelty porn, it honored process and courage. Sponsors called resort, praising training that decentered spectacle for safety. Alma's cousin requested staff counseling, anticipating secondary trauma among employees. I visited housekeeping, thanked them, and left envelopes with notes. They cried, then laughed, insisting I take extra lavender sachets. The solidarity stroll repeated nightly, widening into a quiet ritual. Tourists participated, staff joined, and security walked 2 steps behind. Children carried paper lanterns, drawing sandals and ocean words together. On Thursday, Morning Show requested an appearance, live from the terrace. I agreed with conditions, include experts and survivors beside me. The producer accepted immediately, promising context and gentle pacing today. My husband posted a selfie captioned, growth. Comments demanded accountability. HR placed him on leave pending findings. The internet exhaled. I walked the boardwalk at dusk, sandals tapping measured grace. Naya asked the question softly, what power feels like now? I answered, it feels transferable, like candles lighting without extinguishing.
Tomorrow held hearings, interviews, and new boundaries that welcomed breath. Tonight, I slept barefoot by choice, cobalt sandals guarding dignity.
The morning show began under lights, oceans stitched behind screens. Producers mic'd me gently, checked levels, explained segment boundaries carefully. Naya watched nearby, not interfering, capturing context like weather patterns. Alma stood just off camera, her cousin beside security today. The host opened honoring hospitality workers, policy, and community response. He asked me what changed between the hallway and now. I said strangers built scaffolding so responsibility could climb safely. A policy expert unpacked definitions, naming abuse without melodrama clearly. Another survivor shared scripts for boundaries and extraction during crises. We refused spectacle and instead taught language that keeps breath. Viewers wrote in, grateful, describing dinner conversations shifting toward accountability. Afterward, producer hugged Alma, thanking her for courage embedded operationally. We walked outside into sun made newly ethical by witnesses. My phone vibrated with a message labeled urgent from Lydia. She said the audit opened, revealing unapproved accounts and reimbursements. A whistleblower had come forward, corroborating the receipts from mediation. Compliance requested my presence to affirm narrow, factual timelines only. I agreed with conditions. Counsel present, recorded, copies provided immediately. Meanwhile, Naya's feature catalyzed a coalition of resort employees nationwide. They demanded training, emergency sandals closets, and survivor-centered incident protocols. The chain's headquarters responded, promising policy reviews within 30 days. Alma's cousin forwarded minutes, inviting me to consult compensated appropriately nearby. Back upstairs, my sister spread papers like maps requiring navigation. We outlined next moves, property inventory, bank notifications, storage arrangements. A lawyer friend recommended documenting sentimental items with photographs tonight. I photographed the cobalt sandals because they held narrative leverage. Reporters waited outside the gate. Security arranged staggered departures discreetly. We left through kitchens smelling like bread and patient courage. In the car, Alma passed me cards from housekeepers thanking. They drew sandals with wings and wrote, "Walk safely home." At compliance headquarters, walls hummed with printers and timid resolve. Lydia greeted us wearing flats, as if declaring practical solidarity. Counsel joined, introducing himself gently, centering my agency from introductions. The interview began with a timeline from breakfast to mediation. I confirmed facts, declined speculation, and referenced documents precisely only. They asked permission to contact Alma's cousin. I provided number. When finished, Lydia escorted us to elevators, face determined, kind. She said, "Whatever happens, your clarity helped us protect others." Outside, Naya waited with tea, refusing to ask additional questions. She filmed my hands holding the cup, cobalt straps visible. That night, the feature aired longer, braided with other voices. A union representative praised the resort's response, challenging competitors directly. A psychologist explained humiliation biology and how communities regulate shame. The segment ended with Alma thanking her grandmother for lessons. Messages flooded again, but now they included administrators and executives. An airline offered flight changes without fees, citing exceptions policy. A law school invited me speak about documentation and courage. I accepted some invitations, reserving energy like money needing stewardship. HR called again, leave extended, investigation widening to senior leadership. My husband sent another apology, this time unsentimental and specific. He acknowledged misuse of funds, arrogance, and endangering me deliberately. He asked for discretion until hearings. I answered, boundaries reiterated. Meanwhile, solidarity strolls spread beyond our resort into cities everywhere. People walked carrying sandals, posting scripts for safer conversations widely. A brand offered sandal donations. Alma negotiated them for shelters. Her cousin engineered storage, distribution, and a pamphlet on boundaries. Naya filmed pallets arriving, workers cheering softly, avoiding spectacle again. She asked me about retribution. I spoke about repair instead. We returned to the tide pool and read letters publicly. Survivors spoke sentences like keys. Lock somewhere yielded finally, softly. The chain announced a program funding emergency nights for travelers. They named it Alma, which made her cover eyes briefly. She laughed, then cried, organized volunteers because feelings require containers. Audit findings hit headlines, dry words carrying heavy consequence rain. The company suspended executives and opened cooperation with regulators immediately. A prosecutor requested my statement. My attorney coordinated carefully beforehand. I spoke only to dates, receipts, and observable actions witnessed. He resigned quietly from his position, citing personal reasons abruptly. I did not celebrate. Grief and justice are strange siblings. They sit together, arguing softly, while washing dishes after storms. That night, the terrace filled again with cello and candles. Alma told the story of her grandmother and porch rules. Never leave anyone outside crying. Always fetch sandals immediately, please. My sister raised a glass and toasted unspectacular administrative courage. Naya turned off her camera and just listened, finally, with. Later, she asked permission to write about the apology's usefulness. I said apologies are tools, not currency, and require maintenance. She smiled, grateful, and promised to include repair resources generously. The Solidarity Stroll became a fundraiser, assisting shelters with transportation. Children decorated donation boxes with drawings of strong sandals everywhere. A singer volunteered performing a song about leaving with dignity. People cried, then laughed, then danced to grief replaced by choreography.
I felt the ground participate, steady beneath previously shaking choices. The resort offered me another week, complimentary, no publicity requested. I accepted 2 days only, choosing forward motion over nostalgia. We booked flights, separate seats, aisle for me, window avoided. Before leaving, I visited every department, learning names and stories. Alma's grandmother arrived, tiny and fierce, carrying a ribboned box. Inside were sandals, embroidered cobalt thread, soles sturdy like promises. She said, "Tradition requires gifts when woman walks new ways." I cried, then bowed, then laced them with deliberate gratitude. On departure day, reporters waited again, but we exited quietly. Alma walked us to the car and pressed envelopes gently. Inside were copies of policies, timelines, and contact lists, laminated. She said, "These are travel talismans. Share them when needed." At the airport, security recognized me, offered privacy and water. I purchased a notebook, stamped with constellations, titled Navigation Manual. On the plane, I wrote intentions rather than explanations. Finally, I landed stronger. Cobalt sandals whispering, "I am never pretending." Home was the same house with a different gravity. I unlocked the door with my sister beside me, and the cobalt sandals clicking a measured metronome across the threshold. The air held the faint smell of lemon cleaner and old arguments I refused to rehearse. We opened windows. The neighborhood yawned. The afternoon slid in like a cat that knows the room. I placed the resort folder on the dining table, where holidays had once happened, and the paper changed the furniture's posture. My sister brewed tea, strong enough to carry a plan. We made a list that did not apologize. Locksmith, attorney, therapist, bank, storage, passwords, mail hold, car title. Then I walked room to room like a curator inventorying a life that would remain mine. Every object asked a question. Keep, release, photograph, testify. I photographed the sandals first. Symbolism is a witness that never forgets its lines. The phone buzzed with messages wearing urgency swaddled in emojis. Naya texted, "Back in town. Sending draft for your veto tonight." Alma sent a picture of her grandmother holding the ribboned sandal box like a crown. Lydia emailed a short update. Leave extended, audit widening, thank you for clarity. From him, 5 drafts of apology, each with a weather forecast attached. Rain predicted, winds shifting, barometric pressure of remorse. I archived them into a folder labeled Meteorology. At 4, the locksmith arrived, a woman with quiet hands and a tool case that looked like a tackle box for futures. She replaced cylinders, handed me new keys, taught me the graceful physics of a door that closes without bruising. "You get to decide who enters," she said, a sentence worth framing. At 6, my attorney, a man who spoke in paragraphs with footnotes, spread forms across the table. "We file for a temporary order tomorrow," he said. "We keep communications in writing, we centralize financials, we protect your routines. We design boringness that cannot be misunderstood." My sister passed him the receipts from the mediation envelope. He whistled softly, then stilled. "This is not just misbehavior," he said. "It's systems. Your dignity has a long shadow." We agreed on an early court appointment and a statement template for journalists. No gossip, only policy. Naya's draft arrived. Spare, careful, bright with ordinary heroism. She described the rituals more than the scandal, the cello more than the shouting, the sandals more than the man. I suggested 2 edits, both about consent. She thanked me and wrote back a single word: honored. By 9, neighbors rang the bell one at a time, bringing casserole diplomacy. A nurse from down the street offered to teach self-defense on Saturdays. An older man confessed he had put his wife out once, decades ago, and had never forgiven his younger self. He apologized to me like an oath to his grandchildren. The neighborhood changed by inches. At midnight, I stood barefoot by choice, on my own kitchen tile, and listened to the refrigerator hum like a stalwart. I slept. Morning brought courthouse light, fluorescent, unforgiving, clarifying. My attorney and I sat on a bench that had seen everything and nothing. Across from us, a woman cried into a sleeve and a translator murmured mercy. He arrived with a lawyer who dressed like a verdict and a face rehearsed in neutrality. He looked smaller. Grief and consequence have similar tailoring. The judge called our names in a voice that did not flirt with drama. I stated the hallway. I stated the blanket. I stated the sentence he chose, "I'm done pretending," and the way his hands chose not to hand me sandals. The judge asked precise questions. My answers did not tremble. The order granted: temporary protection, financial structure, possession of the house, scheduled mediation through the court with separate entrances. We left through different doors. On the steps, a young reporter asked what I wanted. "Policy," I said, "and for women to have shoes, rules, and witnesses." She smiled with relief, as if I'd given her a quote that fed instead of burned. Back home, emails braided into a rope I could climb. A travel chain requested my input on their emergency sandal closets and dignity infrastructure training. Alma looped me into a call with managers from 3 cities. We built a checklist together: spare footwear in multiple sizes, trauma-informed scripts for staff,
clear documentation templates, privacy perimeters, networked partnerships with shelters, and a protocol for contacting security without escalating shame. We made it boring on purpose. Boring survives. By late afternoon, a producer from a national magazine asked for an essay in my own voice. She said, "Write about the after. People think the hallway is the story. We want the morning after the hallway." I wrote at the dining table, cobalt sandals within arm's reach like a metronome for sentences. I wrote about the way humiliation corrodes memory and how kindness restores chronology. I wrote about cupboards that still open to bowls, about neighbors who leave tinfoil over kindness, about the miracle of a lock that obeys the person who pays the mortgage. I wrote about the cello and about Alma's grandmother. I wrote about policy as a love language. When I finished, the sun had slid behind roofs, and my hands smelled like lemons and ink. He called once, which I did not pick up. He texted that he would be telling his side. I answered with the order's terms and a sentence Soraya gave me. "You may communicate through counsel." He replied with silence, and minutes later, a public post about growth that did not include nouns. The comments asked for receipts. I had them. I did not need to wave them. At dusk, I took a walk around the block in the sandals that had become verbs. A girl with chalk asked if she could draw them. She sketched cobalt wings and wrote, "Walk safe." Her mother watched from the porch holding a sleeping baby and mouthed, "Thank you." I nodded back, thinking of every porch where someone waits with keys and a rule. Never leave anyone outside crying. Night fell incomptipid. I slept again, not heroically, not perfectly, but inside a house that answered to my name. The next day, a letter arrived with a return address I recognized from HR. Lydia wrote that the audit had expanded into a formal investigation with external counsel and regulators, that several people had been placed on leave, and that she hoped this process would keep other women from hallways without sandals. I stood in my driveway, letter in hand, and felt the local sky make room for a larger weather system.
The magazine published the essay on a Tuesday that smelled like rain. The headline refused spectacle. After the hallway, boring plans that save women. Naya's feature dropped the same hour, synchronized like lifeguards trading binoculars. The photos showed hands, shoes, door frames, and paper boats in a tide pool. The faces remained private by design. By noon, inboxes produced invitations that felt like architecture. Libraries, unions, shelters, hotel associations, HR conferences. I learned to say yes with conditions. You pay staff and survivors. You include experts. You build policy. No confetti cannons. Alma and her cousin joined the first panel, bringing forms and timelines and the phrase that had become our banner, dignity infrastructure. Her grandmother watched from the front row, small and seismic, knitting a cobalt ribbon into a practical crown. He tried a counter-narrative on a podcast that specializes in performative redemption arcs. He said stress. He said misunderstanding. He said we both made mistakes. Listeners sent clips to my attorney. We didn't engage. The host invited me for balance. I proposed instead a mediator, a policy expert, and a housekeeper from any resort. They declined. The audience didn't. Comments filled with scripts, resource links, and the sentence Soraya had taught me. Boring is where agreements live. The show moved on. The cultural tide didn't.
Meanwhile, the audit matured into subpoenas and spreadsheets with arteries. I stayed in my lane. Dates, receipts, observable facts. A regulator's office requested an affidavit. My lawyer submitted notarized chronology. Lydia sent a note that read like a thank you from the future. Because you documented, we could protect. Consequences followed routes they always should have followed. Misuse repaid, ethics training mandated, oversight widened beyond optics. At home, the house grew lighter by things it relinquished. I donated marriage furniture that had never learned to hold us without squeaking. I kept the dining table because it had seen the paper city bloom. I painted one wall the color of the sandals, a strip of sky I could own in February. Neighbors came to help. We ate pizza on the floor. The cello music I'd found online expanded across the living room, braiding silence into strength. On a Sunday, we hosted a porch clinic. A therapist taught boundary phrases. I can't do that. Here's what I can do. I need to pause. A lawyer explained paper, how to photograph, how to file, how to keep calm while copying. A hotel manager from across town showed a suitcase with a sandal drawer. We laughed, we practiced, we ate watermelon. We traded numbers like lighthouses exchanging coordinates. Children drew chalk sandals along the sidewalk like a runway to safety. Repercussion traveled to places I hadn't imagined. A shipping company instituted dockside dignity guidelines. A sports arena opened a comfort closet, and a tech firm wrote a landing policy for employees experiencing domestic upheaval during business travel. Journalists asked me how it felt to become a symbol. I answered with distrust for symbols and faith in systems. I'm a woman in sandals who took notes. They kept quoting the sandals. I didn't mind. Symbols are bridges if they still know where the roads are. One evening, a stranger rang my bell. A woman around my age, hair damp with panic, handle leaving a red track on her palm. Her husband snored in a car parked at the curb. Can I wait here until my sister arrives? She asked, voice thin with apology. Yes, I said, and opened the door into a house that knew its rule. I set tea on the table and slid the laminated contact list Alma had given me across the wood. We called a shelter advocate, then an officer trained in de-escalation. We spoke in sentences that had already saved someone else. By the time her sister's headlights curled into my driveway, the woman had a plan and shoes that fit. She hugged me and whispered, "Your sandals were an address." I cried after she left, quietly, grateful that a hallway somewhere had not won. He requested a final mediation session to resolve property he hadn't itemized. I agreed, on the condition of witnesses and boringness. Soraya returned with her pen and her weathered wood patience. He looked tired the way consequences make men human. Less spectacle, more gravity. He signed over the car title, the heirloom he had never dusted, and the safe deposit access he had prevented. He asked to say something not for the record. "Your essay was better than mine," he said. I almost laughed. "We weren't competing," I answered. He nodded, and something small and decent flickered. Maybe the first honest sentence he'd said all year was the one about my writing. We left with document copies and a silence that did not threaten. In late autumn, the resort chain launched the ALMA program with grants for shelters and trauma-informed training for all properties. They flew Alma and her cousin to a conference and put her grandmother on stage to ring a small bell every time someone described a policy without a person in it. That bell changed the panel more than any keynote. Naya covered it with a gentleness I trusted. She stopped filming whenever tears turned private. The article closed with a sentence that tasted like citrus. Policy is the opposite of pretending. Winter arrived with its clean edges. I bought boots, kept the sandals in the front closet, and moved through the cold like a person who knows where the lights are. I joined a Saturday group that delivers emergency kits to hotels: sandals, chargers, phone lists, tiny notebooks, and pens that don't skip. At night, the cello still unspooled patience. I slept beneath a cobalt stripe of paint that had become a promise. On a New Year's Eve, Alma called from the terrace where we had eaten lemon pie. Someone handed her a cello bow to wave at midnight. She held her phone toward the ocean, and the water counted down with a hush, and the resort lights blinked like quiet applause. "Happy, boring New Year," she said. "Happy boring," I answered, laughing full. Just before midnight, I stepped on my porch with neighbors and kids and chalk dust on my palms. We drew sandals marching into January. I said a small prayer to the God of paper and shoes. Keep the locks gentle, keep the doors honest, keep the hallways short. When midnight rang, we hugged without spectacle and went back inside to lives that would not pretend. I placed my sandals by the door and whispered to the room, to the year, to the woman I had become. I am not a symbol. I am an address where policies live. And when the house breathed, I could swear it answered, "Welcome home."
I returned to the resort at the edge of a soft winter. The kind that wears silver around the wrists of the sea and teaches the palms to rustle in a lower key. Everything looked familiar and undecorated by crisis. The lobby orchids preened in their glass. The elevator sighed with its practiced patience. The terrace remembered how to hold light like a bowl. Alma spited me, the way lighthouse keepers recognize the shape of a returning ship, first by motion, then by story. "You came back," she said, and it sounded less like a question and more like a blessing that knew my name. "I wanted to thank the floor," I answered, "and the blanket, and the way the air learned not to hurry me." She laughed, pressed her forehead to mine, then held me at arm's length, an appraisal both practical and tender. "We've kept your table by the balustrade," she said. "We've kept your lemon pie rehearsed." Her cousin emerged from the back office carrying a new folder, slimmer than the first, labeled in neat block letters. Aftercare. The word felt kind. Inside were pages that did not demand anything of me. Updates on the Alma program, copies of the staff training modules, a photograph of the emergency sandals closet lined with boxes labeled by size, and a letter from the housekeepers team, each signature rounded like a shore pebble. "We still refresh the policy," he said. "We still believe in boring courage." "I've come to love boring," I said. "It's where the furniture of a life finally fits." We walked the path to the tide pool. Children played with paper boats again, more careful now, as though the water had become an elder. A cellist tuned beneath the shade, the first notes braided with salt, and the day exhaled into a single low vowel. I set my cobalt sandals beside me and curled my toes into the warm stone. Naya arrived, camera slung low, notebook in her bag, out of ceremonial respect. She had promised not to record without asking. The promise has survived fame. "I'm here to listen," she said, "and then not to print." We sat in a quiet geometry, the four of us, plus the sound of the sea writing long, patient lines. Amma brought water and a plate of mango slices that looked like late sunlight,
and we ate the pieces with grateful silence. Somewhere behind us, a printer in the office hummed like a distant hive, administration still doing its honeyed work. "What changes when you return?" Naya asked at last, voice the volume of a tide written on rice paper. "Perspective, mostly," I said. "The hallway has shrunk to its right size. It used to be a cathedral. Now it is a badly lit decision I will never worship again." "And the sandals?" Alma's grandmother had sewn another pair since the last time I was here, and Alma had sent them, but I had chosen to bring the originals. Their straps had softened against my skin as if time were a lotion. "They feel like a grammar I finally speak," I said. "Subject, I. Verb, walk. Object, away, toward. Either, but chosen." We walked to the emergency closet. Staff had labeled the shelves with handwriting that could have belonged to cousins, the way you share a fridge without arguing about orange juice. There were chargers coiled like small, obedient snakes, laminated contact lists, little notebooks stamped with constellations, pens that didn't skip. I touched a row of sandals and blessed them quietly with the most practical prayer I knew. May they be used when necessary and boring when not. That afternoon, Alma guided me through the kitchen, introducing me to new hires. A young cook slid a tray of lemon pies from the oven, and the room smelled like reconciliation that didn't require anyone to capitulate. The pastry chef told me she had learned to keep extra portions for the nights when grief arrived unannounced and wouldn't sit politely on the terrace. She said we box it. Grief likes to leave with leftovers. On the terrace at dusk, the solidarity stroll shifted into a different ritual. People carried sandals to the waterline and set them down side by side, then stepped back, leaving a bright, practical constellation at the rim of the sea. Some pairs were cheap and honest. Some were sturdy and embroidered with quiet pride. No speeches, no banners, just the mute eloquence of readiness. A child asked if the ocean would take them. "No," Alma said, "the ocean just counts them." When the moon shouldered up out of the horizon, Naya asked if I wanted a photograph. "Of what?" I said. "Of you not pretending." We made an image with nothing dramatic in it. My sandals, the tide pool, a page from the aftercare folder, a cup of tea, and a hand on the balustrade. Later, she sent it to me without caption. I printed it at home and pinned it near my door. Now and then, I nod to it on my way out, like a neighbor. Night gathered. I walked with Alma to the edge of the property where the hallway of the original morning ended and the world began. "We could mark it," she said, "not with a plaque, but with a practice." "What practice?" I asked. "Housekeeping reports the number of sandals in the closet each dawn. If the number dips, we check on each other." That's policy. And love. We sat again by the tide pool. The cello found its long note and held it, a bridge across the quiet. I closed my eyes and let the water count me. Not as a headline, not as a symbol. Simply as a person who had learned to arrange her life in a syntax of safety. When I opened them, Alma's grandmother was there, little and seismic, a ribbon box tucked under her arm. She pressed it into my hands. "For the friend you haven't met yet, so you don't have to go searching when the night asks." I nodded, the kind of nod that begins a vow. Then I said the only words that made sense in that slow, ethical light. "I will be here, or if not here, somewhere with a folder and a pair of shoes." Morning wore a transparent shawl, the sun drawing a thin line of gold along the rims of cups and the edges of windows.
I woke before alarms, the way you do in a house that has already forgiven you. The resort's cotton dress, laundered into humility, waited on a chair. I slipped into it and stepped onto the balcony to greet the ocean like an elder. Hands open, voice low, heart quiet enough to be taught. Alma met me in the lobby with 2 paper cups and a list of nothing urgent. Stroll, tide pool, kitchen visit, a goodbye that would not dramatize itself. We moved through the early air the way one moves through a museum of familiar paintings, noticing new brushstrokes because the eyes are now built for noticing. By the water, the sandals we'd left became punctuation for the morning's first paragraph. The sea had not stolen them because this wasn't a story about theft. A boy sat with his grandmother, practicing tying straps on a shoe 2 sizes too big. She smiled at me with the tired radiance of someone who has slept after a long watch. I thought of every porch where someone had opened a door, every lobby where a front desk learned to be a sanctuary, every hallway that remembered how to be just a hallway again. Naya joined us without her camera. No notes today, she said, just a walk. So we walked, past the balustrade that had learned to lean into confidence, past the cello case napping between sets, past the emergency closet where a sign read in Alma's cousin's meticulous handwriting, inventory at 7 a.m., compassion all day. In the kitchen, the pastry chef had set aside a pie boxed in courage. For your sister, she said, who carried a corner of the sky for you. I smiled at the rightness of that description. Alma led me to the spot beside the side door, the one I had avoided. The tile was the same, my heart was not. I used to think this square of floor owned me, I said. Now it's just a geography lesson in where not to stop. And where to begin, Alma replied. We stood there, not as reenactment, but as reclamation. I touched the wall with my fingertips, a small ritual learned from grief and translated into gratitude. The wall warmed, or I warmed it. Either way, the transaction felt fair. Back on the terrace, a staff meeting convened. Brief check-ins, a reminder about documentation, a joke about lemon pies, and a note about making space at the rail for anyone who needed to breathe. Alma's cousin gave out small notebooks stamped with constellations. For details, he said, because memory is a sieve when joy is heavy too. I opened mine and wrote what I wanted to remember, without consulting photographs. The exact pitch of the cello's low C, the way Alma's grandmother tied ribbon like a sailor trusts a knot, the way the ocean counts sandals without subtracting people from themselves. I added a line for the hallway that was no longer holy. I added a line for the sentence I had once feared and now understood. I'm done pretending. I had spoken it to the mirror this morning and meant it differently, not against anyone, not to build a stage, just to clear the room for honest furniture. Before I left, Alma walked me to the emergency sandals closet one last time. We rearranged a few boxes like librarians, indulging in order. She said, "You'll write again, right? When you have language that helps more than it hurts?" I said, "Yes, but I'll also show up. I'll show up with a folder, with tea, with a pair of size 8s. She grinned, touched my cheek, and handed me a tiny bell like the one her grandmother rang at the conference. She said, "Use it when a policy forgets the person in it. Sound carries." At checkout, a tourist recognized me and didn't mention it. She just held the door and said, "Safe travels," which felt like the right size of benediction for a woman in a lobby. Outside, the air held the copper tang of imminent rain, and the palms rehearsed their storm voices in case. The driver placed my bag in the trunk and asked if I wanted music. I said, "Cello, if you have it." He did. As the car rolled away, I looked once at the resort. It looked back without melodrama, a building with good habits.
I thought of the life waiting at home, the cobalt stripe on the wall, the porch with chalk, the neighbors who had learned casseroles can taste like policy, too. I thought of women I would never meet walking away, toward, either, but chosen, their feet held by something honest. I thought of doors that would learn to close without bruising, of lobbies that would learn how to be simple sanctuaries, of hallways that would shorten under the weight of better systems. On the plane, I wrote letters I would never send. One to the hallway, thanking it for shrinking. One to the sandals, praising them for teaching grammar. One to the woman I was the first morning, promising to keep her in the house with the windows open. I slept with the bell in my pocket and woke when the wheels kissed the runway like a kind argument ending well. Home again, I placed the ribbon box from Alma's grandmother in the front closet. I pinned Naya's photograph near the door. I slid the aftercare folder beside my own files. I brewed tea and sat by a cobalt stripe while the rain began, gentle, sounding like paper. Pages turned, forms signed, notes taken. A house breathing in a season that didn't need to be explained. My phone buzzed. Alma had sent a photo. The morning sandals lined up like promises. No caption, none needed. I stepped to the threshold, opened the door, and let the weather in just enough to remind the room we are porous by design. Then I whispered the small prayer I'd made my own. Keep the locks gentle, keep the doors honest, keep the hallways short. The bell on the table brightened. And when I went to bed, the cobalt sandals waited by the door, not as armor, not as symbol, but as practical music. In the quiet, I said the truest sentence I owned. More instruction than declaration, more rhythm than shout. I will not pretend. And the house answered. Its walls practice at hospitality now, its floors safe for bare feet, its windows trained on right. Welcome home.